Have you ever noticed how the moment you stop texting, stop chasing, stop being available, suddenly he starts thinking about you more? It's almost like distance flips a switch. The truth is, men don't always obsess over what they have. They obsess over what they feel slipping away. And when a woman pulls back her energy, it creates a mystery, a challenge, and a sense of loss that many men don't know how to ignore. Today, we're going to break down exactly why men secretly obsess over the women who stop contacting them and what that really reveals about attraction, psychology, and power. Let's start with something that quietly controls so much of human behavior, yet most people don't even notice it happening: scarcity. The moment something becomes less available, it automatically feels more valuable. You see this everywhere in life. Limited edition products sell out faster. Opportunities feel more exciting when they're rare. And the exact same principle applies in attraction. When you're constantly present in someone's life, always replying quickly, always initiating, always being emotionally available, you may think you're building connection. And in some ways, you are. But at the same time, you're also removing something powerful: the space for that person to feel your absence. And without absence, there's no contrast. Without contrast, there's no emotional spike. Everything becomes predictable. Now, here's where things shift. The moment you stop contacting him, the dynamic changes. What was once consistent becomes uncertain. What was once available becomes limited. And suddenly, your presence carries a different weight in his mind. He starts to notice the silence. He starts to feel the gap where your attention used to be. It's not about playing games. It's about understanding that constant availability often gets taken for granted, not because someone is a bad person, but because human nature adapts quickly. When something is always there, the brain stops registering it as special. It becomes normal, expected, even overlooked. But when that same thing is no longer guaranteed, the brain reacts differently. It leans in. It starts asking questions. Why hasn't she texted? Is she busy? Is she talking to someone else? And just like that, you've moved from being a background presence to a focal point in his thoughts. And here's the deeper layer most people miss. It's not just about him missing you, it's about him re-evaluating your value. Because now, instead of you proving your interest again and again, he's left to sit with his own feelings. He has to figure out where you fit in his life without being constantly reminded. Scarcity doesn't just create desire, it creates reflection. It forces someone to confront what they might lose instead of passively enjoying what they have. And that shift is powerful because people don't chase what they already feel secure about. They chase what feels uncertain, what feels just out of reach. But this only works when it's real. It's not about pretending to be unavailable while secretly waiting for a reaction. It's about genuinely pulling your energy back and placing it where it belongs, on your own life, your own priorities, your own growth. That authenticity is what makes the shift believable. And that's what makes it impactful. Because when you're no longer constantly showing up for him, you're showing up for yourself. And that energy is different. It's grounded. It's self-respecting. It says, without words, my time and attention are valuable. And that message is far more powerful than any text you could send. So when your presence becomes something he can't always access, something he can't predict, something he can't take for granted, that's when he starts to feel it. That's when he starts to notice you in a way he didn't before. And that's when silence becomes louder than anything you could have said. Now let's talk about something even more powerful than absence itself, the effect of uncertainty. Because it's not just that you're gone or less available, it's that he doesn't fully understand why. And that question, that little gap in clarity, is what keeps you on his mind far longer than constant communication ever could. When everything is predictable, the mind relaxes. If he knows you'll text, if he knows you'll respond, if he knows exactly where he stands with you at all times, there's no mental effort required. There's no need to think deeply, no reason to analyze, no emotional tension pulling his attention back to you. Everything feels settled, but the moment you stop contacting him or even just pull back slightly, that certainty disappears. And in its place, something much more engaging takes over: curiosity. Suddenly his mind starts trying to fill in the blanks. Did I do something wrong? Is she losing interest? Is there someone else? And those questions don't just come and go, they linger, because the human brain doesn't like unanswered questions. It seeks closure. It wants resolution. And when it doesn't get it, it keeps circling back, replaying moments, analyzing conversations, trying to figure out what changed. That's how you move from being someone he talks to someone he thinks about. And here's what makes this so powerful. Uncertainty creates emotional investment. The more he thinks about you, the more he tries to understand the situation, the more energy he unconsciously puts into you. And as that investment grows, so does his attachment, not because you're chasing him, but because his own mind is pulling him deeper. Think about it. People rarely obsess over what feels completely secure and explained. They obsess over what feels unresolved. The what if, the maybe, the I'm not sure. That's where the mind gets hooked. That's where attention stays locked in. And when you're always available, always clear, always reassuring, you unintentionally remove that hook. You make everything easy to understand, easy to categorize, easy to place in a box. There's no mystery left to explore, no reason for him to lean in and figure you out. But when you step back even slightly, you reintroduce that mystery, not in a manipulative way, but in a natural human way. You allow space for him to wonder. You allow space for him to question. And in that space, his perception of you starts to shift. You're no longer just there. You become someone he can't fully predict, someone he doesn't fully have figured out. And that unpredictability, it's magnetic, because now, instead of you trying to maintain the connection, he starts feeling the pull to restore it. He wants to reach out. He wants to understand. He wants to close that gap. And the more he feels that pull, the more he becomes emotionally involved. But just like before, this only works when it's genuine. It's not about creating confusion for the sake of control. It's about allowing natural space to exist instead of over-explaining, over-giving, and over-showing up. It's about letting things breathe. Because when you stop answering every question before it's even asked, when you stop filling every silence, when you stop making everything completely predictable, you give him the chance to lean in, to think, to feel. And sometimes the most powerful way to stay on someone's mind is to leave just enough unsaid. And then there's something even more subtle, but incredibly powerful, the effect of emotional contrast. Because it's not just about you being there or not being there, it's about the shift between those two states that creates the real impact. When someone gets used to your presence, your messages, your attention, your consistency, it starts to feel normal, not necessarily unappreciated, but familiar, expected. It becomes part of their routine without them even realizing it. Your good morning texts, your check-ins, your energy, it all blends into the background of their day. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear. People often don't fully recognize the value of something while it's consistently there. Not because they don't care, but because the human mind adapts quickly. It stabilizes. It finds comfort in patterns. And once something feels guaranteed, the emotional intensity naturally drops. But the moment that pattern breaks, everything changes. When you stop contacting him, when your energy suddenly pulls back, it creates a contrast he can't ignore. Now, there's a clear difference between what was and what is. And that difference hits harder than anything you could have done while being present. Because now, instead of passively receiving your attention, he's actively noticing its absence. The silence feels louder because it's replacing something that used to be there. The space feels heavier because it used to be filled. And suddenly all those little things he didn't think much about before, they start to stand out. He notices that you're not reaching out. He notices that the conversation isn't flowing the way it used to. He notices that something feels off. And that feeling creates an emotional reaction. This is the power of contrast. It turns something ordinary into something significant. It takes what was once automatic and makes it intentional in his mind. Now he's not just experiencing you, he's aware of you. Think about it like this. A constant sound in the background eventually fades from your awareness. But the moment that sound stops, you notice it instantly. The silence grabs your attention far more than the noise ever did. And that's exactly what happens when your presence shifts. Your absence doesn't just remove something, it highlights it. And in that moment, he starts replaying things. He starts remembering how it felt when you were more present. He starts comparing the past to the present. And through that comparison, your value becomes clearer to him than it ever was before. because now he's not just experiencing your attention, he's feeling the loss of it. And loss is emotional. Loss creates urgency. Loss makes people realize what they might have taken for granted. It brings clarity in a way that constant presence simply can't. But again, this isn't about punishing someone or trying to make them feel bad. It's about understanding that your energy has weight, your presence has impact, and when you give it freely without pause, it can lose the very effect you want it to have. When you allow space, when you step back, when you stop overextending yourself, you create that contrast naturally. You give the other person the chance to feel the difference. And in that difference, something shifts inside them. They start to see you differently. They start to value you differently. Not because you changed who you are, but because the dynamic changed how they experience you. And sometimes it's not your presence that makes someone realize your worth. It's the moment they finally feel what it's like without it. And then there's another layer to this that operates almost instinctively, something most people don't even realize is being triggered, and that's the competitive instinct. Because when everything feels secure, when your attention is guaranteed, there's nothing to pursue. There's no sense of challenge, no reason to step forward with intention. Things just stay as they are. But the moment you pull back, the moment your presence is no longer certain, something shifts internally. It's subtle at first, but it grows quickly. Because now, instead of feeling like he has your attention, it starts to feel like he might be losing it. And that feeling taps into a very different kind of energy. Suddenly, it's no longer passive, it becomes active. He starts to question where he stands. He starts to feel the need to reestablish connection. And without even fully realizing it, he begins to move towards you, not because you're chasing him, but because something inside him wants to close that gap. This is where the idea of winning back comes into play, not in a manipulative or calculated way, but in a natural human response to something slipping out of reach. When people feel like they might lose something valuable, they don't just sit still, they lean in, they try to regain control of the situation. And when you've always been the one showing up, the one reaching out, the one keeping things alive, there's never been a need for him to do that. The effort stays one-sided, not necessarily because he doesn't care, but because the dynamic never required more from him. But when that dynamic changes, when you step back and redirect your energy, you create space for him to step forward. And if there's genuine interest there, he will feel that pull to do something about it. Because now there's a sense of competition, not necessarily with another person, but with the unknown, with the possibility that your attention is no longer his by default, with the idea that he might not be the center of your focus anymore. And that's what makes it powerful. It's not about making him jealous or forcing a reaction. It's about shifting the dynamic so that your attention is no longer something he can assume. It becomes something he has to earn, something he has to choose to invest in. And when that happens, his behavior starts to change. He becomes more intentional, more aware, more engaged. Not because you asked for it, but because the situation now calls for it. This is also where self-respect quietly communicates itself. When you stop overextending, when you stop giving without reciprocity, you're sending a message without saying a word. You're showing that your time, your energy, your presence, they're not unlimited resources. They have value. And people respond differently when they feel that value, because no one feels the need to compete for something that feels guaranteed. But the moment that guarantee disappears, effort increases, attention sharpens, interest deepens. And what's important to understand is that this isn't about changing who you are. It's about changing what you tolerate. It's about no longer filling every gap, no longer carrying the weight of the connection alone, no longer making it easy for someone to stay passive. You're not pulling away to create distance. You're pulling away to restore balance. Because attraction isn't built on one person doing all the work. It's built in the space where both people feel the need to move toward each other. And sometimes the only way to activate that movement is to stop moving first. And this is where everything starts to come back to you, your power, your sense of self, your independence. Because up until now, it might have felt like the focus was all on him, his reactions, his attention, his behavior. But the real shift happens when you stop centering your energy around that and start bringing it back to where it belongs. When you're constantly reaching out, constantly checking in, constantly making yourself available, it's easy to lose that balance without even realizing it. Your mood starts depending on his responses. Your energy starts revolving around whether he shows up or not. And slowly, your world begins to shrink around his presence. But the moment you stop contacting him, something deeper happens than just changing his perception. You change your own position. You step out of that cycle of waiting, wondering, overthinking. You reclaim your time, your focus, your emotional space. And that's where real confidence begins. Not in what you say, not in how you present yourself, but in how you move, in what you choose to give your energy to, in what you choose to no longer chase. Because independence isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about knowing that your life continues fully and completely, whether someone shows up consistently or not. It's about having a sense of self that isn't dependent on someone else's attention. And that energy is impossible to fake. When you genuinely start focusing on your own life, your goals, your passions, your growth, you naturally become less available, not as a strategy, but as a result of having a full life. You're not sitting around waiting to text him because you're busy living your own story. And here's what's interesting. People can feel that shift even without words. They can sense when someone is grounded in themselves versus when someone is seeking validation. And that grounded energy is deeply attractive because it signals something rare, self-respect. It says, I value my time. It says, I don't need to chase what doesn't choose me. It says, I'm already complete. And anyone who comes into my life is an addition, not a requirement. And when that becomes your mindset, your actions naturally align with it. You stop over giving. You stop over explaining. You stop trying to prove your worth through constant availability. Instead, you allow people to meet you where you are. And that's where the dynamic shifts in a powerful way. Because now, instead of you trying to hold the connection together, you're standing in a place where he has to step forward if he wants to be part of your world. And if he does, it's because he chooses to. Not because you made it easy, not because you filled every silence, not because you carried all the effort. And if he doesn't, then you haven't lost anything because you never abandoned yourself in the process. That's the real power here. It's not about controlling someone else's feelings. It's about no longer losing yourself while trying to keep someone else's attention. And when you operate from that place, everything changes. The way you show up, the way you communicate, the way you allow people into your life, it all becomes more intentional, more balanced, more aligned with who you actually are. Because you're no longer acting from fear of losing someone. You're acting from certainty in yourself. And that certainty is what makes your presence valuable, your absence noticeable, and your energy unforgettable. Because at the end of the day, the most attractive thing you can ever be is someone who never abandons themselves. And finally, this is where everything becomes clear. Because when you stop contacting him, when you step back and allow space to exist, you're not just creating mystery or triggering attraction, you're revealing the truth. Up until that point, it's easy to stay in a gray area. When you're the one reaching out, when you're the one maintaining the connection, it can feel like something is there, even if it's not fully mutual. Your effort fills the silence. Your consistency keeps things going. And because of that, it's hard to tell whether he's genuinely invested or just comfortably responding to what you're giving. But the moment you remove that effort, the moment you stop initiating and give the situation room to breathe, everything becomes visible. Because now there's nothing propping the connection up. If he's interested, if he values you, if he feels that connection, you won't have to guess. He'll step forward. He'll reach out. He'll find a way to re-engage. Not perfectly, not always in the exact way you expect, but there will be movement. There will be intention. And that's important because real interest doesn't disappear the moment you stop doing all the work. Real interest responds to absence. It reacts. It adjusts. It shows up. But if there's silence, if there's no effort, if nothing changes when you step back, then that tells you something just as valuable. It tells you that what you were experiencing wasn't sustained by mutual connection. It was sustained by your energy. And that realization, while it might feel uncomfortable at first, is actually freeing because it removes the illusion. It takes you out of the cycle of overthinking, analyzing every message, trying to decode mixed signals. It replaces confusion with clarity, and clarity gives you power because now you're no longer guessing where you stand. You're seeing it directly through action or lack of it. And this is where self-respect becomes non-negotiable because once you see the truth, you have a choice. You can either go back to overextending yourself, trying to recreate something that only existed because you were carrying it, or you can accept what's real and move forward with that knowledge. That's not always easy. Let's be honest. It takes strength to step back and risk seeing that someone might not meet you the way you hoped. It takes confidence to stop chasing answers and allow actions to speak instead. But it's also the only way to protect your time, your energy, and your emotional well-being. Because the right kind of connection doesn't require you to constantly prove your worth. It doesn't rely on you to keep it alive on your own. It meets you halfway. It grows because both people are choosing it. And when you stop contacting him, you create the space for that truth to surface, whatever that truth may be. So instead of seeing it as losing control, understand what you're really doing. You're removing the noise. You're stepping out of the way. You're allowing reality to show itself without interference. And in that moment, you finally see things as they are, not as you hoped they would be. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop reaching out and let the truth come to you.